Hello, 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 and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bill Masuku. I'm a comic book artist and writer, and today I'm going to be doing the full digital painting illustration for my rendition of Chomp, the mascot for a Zimbabwean crisps brand, so potato chips. If you are watching this on Patreon in advance, thank you so much for all the support for making these videos possible and everything else that I get to do outside of my main work. I love teaching, and so I've always wanted to contribute to someone clicking on YouTube and being like, how do I do this thing? Um, and hopefully you learn some stuff from me that you may not have picked up from other people who have far more experience. So first and foremost, what can I tell you about this piece? Um, so I really wanted to combine a couple of things in terms of making this character stand out from my usual work. Right, I want to enter a new era as we hit 2025. Um, or when you're watching this is probably not a new era. So I typically use a the pen tool, but I chose to go with the pencil this time around. The pencils are fluffier, it's a little looser, and it gives this textured feel that I feel works with this furry character. I didn't want to use that word. I really didn't want to use that word. Um, this furry character that is Chomp. Um, so what I really wanted to get across, especially with these early strokes, were to create a character that was both sturdy, right? There's a lot of like blockiness to him, but also like he's got like a fun appeal. So he's got like some sharper edges. His eyes are ill defined, um, and I think that's more so part of my style than intention. I freestyle a lot, but like when I feel a character, I feel a character. Um, I really wanted to make that one I feel a little bit more sunken, so I just put a little bit of shade behind that or underneath that. Um, and so what you saw there, I was just flicking between the pencils, um, and what I'm gonna call inks. So again, I'm a comic book artist, so the terminology may flip in between, but these are the more tied down lines. I think that's more of an animation term than it is an illustration term, but the tied down lines for this character. And so maybe you're getting into this and you're like, I already know how to put pen or pencil on paper. Um, what is it about digital illustration that I can learn from you? And I think it's mostly the process. That early sketching stage is really fun, right? You get the idea straight from your head onto the page, and then you have to do the hard work of refining it. And the refining can make it feel like you're losing the energy behind each of the stroke decisions or indecisions, because sometimes you're in the zone and you're not even thinking about why something looks cool. And when you get to the tie down, when you get to the inks, like it feels very mechanical. A way to definitely avoid that um, is to change the line weight. So that's a very simple thing of explaining that. Make the pen thicker or thinner as you go along. So for the head, I mostly used a uniform um, size. So I wanted to go a little bit thicker um, with the rest of the body to give that weight to the form. So that's just one of the many ways. Like you are not restrict. Like if you choose to have a thin pen, sure, but you're not ever restricted to that. The fun of digital art is your tools are fluid as your decision making, which means you're not restricted by paper size or having to erase and go back and forth. You have that infinite Control Z, which may feel like cheating when you start out. You're like, no, I should commit to these lines. Nah, you're good. You're good, homie. Um, what I would say is that a piece like this, it took me like an hour, an hour from start to finish to get this done. And that's mostly because I've refined that process of do your pencils, tie down the inks, mask out the character, do the flats, add shadows, and add highlights, and then do some special effects. Following this process has made it so much easier. So I have this like massive banner on the right that says, follow me as socials or scan me. But typically when it comes to layer work, um, the same ideas that you apply in painting also apply to digital painting. So work from the background forwards, or from the background to the foreground. Um, which is why as soon as the line work is done, thinking about, and I used the word earlier, masking out the form. And for a comic book, that's just called flatting. And I'll explain a little bit more about it when we get to that actual process in the video. But I worked with someone earlier this year, and the final image was good-ish. Um, and that wasn't why I needed them. I didn't need it to be good. I needed it to be goodish, and it was. The problem is when you are working with people digitally, their thought process around how to form a final image is all different. There's as many ways to do digital art as they are digital artists. Some people are very particular about not going over a certain number of layers because it's messy. Some people are so organized with putting things into folders and subfolders that they know exactly where to go if so much as a dot is out of place. I'm I'm a freestyle kind of person, but when it comes to layers, it you have to be so intentional with it. Not even myself. Like when you're working with other people, um, and the reason I bring this up is because when I looked at that person's layers, it was nonsense. Everything was at a differently scaling opacity until it blended into a final image, and I think that's a cool effect. But everything is indecisive, right? And that's perfectly fine when you're in your sketch phase. But as you develop the image, you have to commit to some ideas. You have to commit to some decisions, and one of those is your form. So all the white space around Chomp here has got nothing to do with me, and it really helps if your lines are airtight. Um, what that means is if you have used digital art tools, there's a wand. And a wand can select very many things within a particular layer. And if there's a gap in those lines, then the selection tool will flood and everything will feel wrong and it won't pick what you want to pick. But if you get the outline right, so imagine making a sandbox. Putting the wood of the walls down first and then adding the sand is easier than putting the sand and then trying to get the walls to scoop the sand into place. Um, and so this process of just making sure that there's no hole so the sand doesn't leak, no particles, no fluids leak out, is really important, right? So following these steps of pencils and then inks and then flats and then or pencils, inks, masking, and then flats, and then have fun with it from there, depending on what kind of digital artist you want to be. But with this, I was really just following the process that I've had for a couple of years. I've seen a couple of people use different softwares for different reasons. Um, so a lot of people will use Photoshop. It's a great starting point because I think most digital illustration softwares are based in some way loosely off of Photoshop. Um, Between the tools, the shortcuts, the way layers are constructed, Photoshop is a really good place to start. But again, I guess everyone comes from a different financial or economic background, which means that not everybody can get access to Photoshop. The Adobe Suite is not free. Um, there are free alternatives for digital software. I think Krita is free. If you have an iPad, your sketchbook, like literal, that's the name, like the Autodesk sketchbook, is free with the program. Um, and if you want to spend a little bit of money, if you're on an iPad that you get Procreate, it should still be $10. Um, and then Clip Studio has two different versions. I think there's Clip Studio Paint and Clip Studio EX. I can't remember which one I have. I assume I have EX. Because mine can also do animation, and I think that's the EX version. But both of those things are once off payments. So you pay that $10 for Procreate and it's yours. Like you continue to use that iPad or you continue to have that iCloud account, it's your program forever. Um, and then same thing with Clip Studio. The price varies, but varies in a good way in that Clip Studio very often has sales seasons. Um, yeah, like super discount. I think when I got mine, it was because it was on discount, and I was like, I've been using Photoshop my whole life, but I want to branch out. I want to try something new. And ever since then, I have not looked back, and it's been a couple of years since. I love Photoshop. I would go back to it all the time if I could. But specifically for what I do in terms of digital illustration, comic book work, Clip Studio is just designed for that. Photoshop is more of a generalist tool, which is why there's other things in the Adobe Suite that do very similar but niche things. Um, yeah, you wouldn't notice it in the final illustration, but I changed back to the regular smooth pen tool for the packet of chips because I felt like it's a different element of the illustration, but really you cannot tell. It is for me to contain that feeling and keep it going. And sometimes artists will have these little quirks about them about what they think is precious and what they think isn't, right? And some of those things form your style or are derivative of your personality. And particularly when you're early in your career, some of those things become your self-imposed hurdles. The first one that comes to mind is not using reference. A lot of younger artists will say it's cheating. That I don't want to have an image next to me drawing because it feels like I'm just copying. Um, when you get to an actual art class, some of the first things you do are life studies because you are training your eye to observe, your brain to store, and then transmit that information into your hand, right? So you're creating a circuit of muscle memory to see, to perceive, to recreate over and over again. And there's only like seven original ideas under the sun. Everything else is an amalgamation, a combination, or a Rubik's cubing of things that people have felt, seen, or discovered. Right? They already pre-existed, and maybe that pre-existence is somebody else's work. It's perfectly fine. You cannot invent human poses. You have to take that from humans, right? And even when you design aliens or other creatures, it's usually a combination of other things. Like vampires in their true form, quotation marks, are usually taken from bats. So go look at some bat wings that are unique um, from birds' wings, and invent your own way of doing it, but like learn how to invent. Um, yeah. Just having a sip of water, talking back to back is Um, it's a lot, and this piece again, it's like an hour long, but I spent like the last 20 minutes in a different program, just doing the graphic design elements. I really wanted to do all of the illustration here. Now that all the lines are locked in, and one of the reasons I'm avoiding saying inking here is because inking means that all the lines are black. Here, I chose different colored lines to 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 make each of the elements pop. So the fur pops different from the jeans, right? And it's easier when you're able to color like that. So I don't know if you just saw, but I was trying to use the wand tool to select all of the outlines, and there was a leakage, so it did not work. So I have to look around at particular areas, so like joints where I got a little bit loose with my line work, to make sure that everything connects. And sometimes the program will be like, nah, I'll let it go, and I'm gonna do what you want me to do. But a lot of the time, you you will battle with it if you don't complete your outline, complete your border, that wood frame to your sandbox correctly. So it half worked, right? There's something wrong with like the disconnection of the chips, but I was like, I'll just use a brush. It's perfectly fine. Um, yeah. I was so happy with the ease of creating these flats that I immediately just dove into making sure that the things that were popping, right? So again, working with layers means that you have to think in layers. The fur that's breaking out from the jeans, that line work is very close to each other, but the colors are so far apart. Like the layer on which I'm putting the blue of the jeans and the layer of which I'm putting the yellow of the fur are so far apart that I had to do that first. So I went and literally just made sure that the fur was masked out. And when I paint underneath this layer, and you'll see it just now, when I paint underneath this layer, I'm not worried about the fur and the lines. Like it's done now. It's a completely separate element. It is in the foremost ground of the image. So anything I do underneath won't be affected. Hopefully I do that like now. So I put the base mask back on, and I'm drawing on top of the mask again. I picked a blue that I thought would print well. It's not always the case. Again, Clip Studio isn't perfect, but it's amazing for what it does. The one thing that I would have liked is to be able to tell print colors at a toggle of a button like you can in Photoshop. In Photoshop, I think it's Control Shift Y. So I brushed out the jeans, doing my best not to make any mistakes, and boom! Now that everything in the foreground for that fur is set in stone, it's the last thing I have to worry. It's literally the last thing I have to worry about. Paint, and the jeans and the hat are complete. Yeah. I thought about giving them a shirt because one of the iterations of the Chompkins character design, I think the current one, he wears like a baseball shirt, which is weird because we don't really play baseball in Zimbabwe. I don't know. It's a cool, unique design choice, and I won't question it any further, at least for now. And then I wanted to make sure that each of the chips also had that same in the foreground treatment. And then I added some extra like speckles, just as the packet is being popped, just getting that feel that there's like the dust of the chips and the broken smaller grains of the chips bleeding out. Um, Paying particular attention to the smaller areas. Um, so I almost had his mouth open, but I think it didn't complete the idea of chomping for me. Like chomping is a complete motion. Um, and so the teeth were shut. So like that was very intentional. Um, and again, like once you make a decision like that, you commit to it because if this was client work, they're gonna ask you why isn't the mouth open, why isn't the mouth closed, why this pose, and a whole bunch of other questions that feel like why are you attacking me? I'm doing my best. But like once you commit to ideas, you also have to find the rationale. Um, Much like some, or like most people doing their masters or their PhD, they have to defend some decision making to justify how good their work is. It's pretty much the same thing here. Um, with this red or this maroon that I chose for the jalapeno flavor packet, it was the 10%. Um, I think an infographic explains it any better than I could. I would ramble for like another 10 minutes. But there's something called the 60-30-10 rule, which is effectively a lot of good design. It's not set in stone, but a lot of good design limits the color range to one really big primary color, a secondary color, and an accent. So these are mine: the yellow, the blue, and the maroon. Um, there's other things that are happening in there, like I'm going to put like a silver foil for the edges of that packet. And there's other colors into consideration. But if you squint, those are the three colors that stand out. And because there's only 10% of that maroon, it's very easy for your eye to be pulled in that direction. If I had made the packet yellow, it would have gotten lost in the yellow of the rest of the image. Um, and and again, when you've been doing this long enough, there's just some things that you don't explain out loud, but when you're starting out, you don't think about other people's eyes. You only think of your own. And that's a quick way to lock yourself into a box of stagnancy. Um, the human eye is an incredibly detailed tool, um, and so guiding the reader, the viewer's eye, is your job. Um, Whether you're using line weight, like we are talking earlier, to pull the reader's or viewer's eye to like the shoulders, under the arms, are there by the right hand, the foot, the thick lines of the fur coming out. Like those are points of interest because they differ from other places. Our eyes love contrast and difference, and so you can use line or you could use color. And so that blue on the top of that head, right, is like a bridging element that forces you to go from the cap, the face, to the packet, and that line, the line of sight that you can control. Um, and there's a number of things going on. So I've said you can use line, you can use color, but you can also just use distance. So the chips are scattered, right? But their movement insinuates, or their placement insinuates motion, and that also pulls your eye upwards. So it forms this tick, like from the top of the hat down to the face to the chips, and then upwards off the page. And I really wanted to have chips that were cropped out by the edge of the canvas to make it feel like they are popping out. If there was one thing I would change, it's maybe tilting the packet a bit so that we have a few more in the foreground, or the more extreme foreground, around where the right leg is. But right now, because of the shading that I've applied, it's easy to see that they are existing within their own plane of background foreground chips. Um, yeah, and now the shading. I've seen some people start with highlights. I am more comfortable starting with shadows, because shadows are how we get our form. Um, a disc becomes a sphere when the light falls on it in a particular way. And humanoid, alien, animalistic, building, all forms are light interacting with it in some way. So I wanted to make sure that the muscle structure or the chest structure um, was done first, because I wanted to put like a insignia on his chest later. Um, and I was worried about putting too much shadow on the face, because this is a mascot for a chip brand, not a villain. But then I was like, but it's my rendition. So I was like, man, just put all the shading you can. And sometimes the shading process is organic. And I will say now, it is one of the things that slows me down. I could have shaded out an entire area and then erased where the light is. But because I'm imagining as I'm drawing, which is fun, it's just inefficient. Like, it's one of those things like, is it your style? Is this intentional? Do you know what you're doing when you're brushing like this? I know what I'm doing. And I also know that it's inefficient at times, which is why I try to speed up in other areas with my general um, practice of pencils, inks, flats, and so on and so forth. I wanted the light to come diagonally, and so making sure that the shadows were also still interesting shapes and not just like rounded rounded soft lights. I was using a hard brush here to make sure that the form feels thick, it feels heavy, and around about joining here, I started considering the fluffiness of the shadow. So I wanted to increase the brush size, and then just try to get the individual fur tufts to um, to feel like fur. I don't know how else to describe fur now. Um, but yeah, then I was like, just a little bit more light here to make sure that it is consistent. Because something can look cool and inconsistent, and vice versa. It's a balance of, does this make sense, and is it fun to look at? Because I'm not making a diagram. I'm not a physicist. Um, but there's general things that, again, the human eye is incredibly sensitive to detail. Um, there's some things that you just have to do. I actually didn't initially intend on doing the shadow for the cap, but again, I'm feeling it out as I paint to get the most natural collection of shadows falling on this body. And yeah, I'm very happy with how this is turning out. Mm, mm. If you're a African artist, illustrator, comic book author, one of the things that, I mean, it's a general thing to do, is just save often, because we are subject to um, far more power cuts or electrical cuts than most other continents, right? It's quite infamous for it. And sometimes it's about, you know, uh, making sure that there's a place that you can return to, but it's also just a good practice to get into, much like liking, subscribing, and hitting that bell for notifications. Um, the other practice that I would encourage you to get into is making backups. So here I would have stopped, or earlier in my career, I would have stopped, uh, done a save as, maybe added the date, um, and continued on that new file so that I always have a legacy document. Sometimes the power will go while you are saving, or something will happen to your actual device, and those files are no longer, or the most up to date version is no longer accessible when you do like a system recovery or a backup. Have a flash drive, have a hard drive. The cloud is now very accessible. Um, but physical is always far better. Um, you might not have data. Maybe your cell provider or your Wi-Fi provider is down that day because they are also suffering from electricity cuts. Like at a certain point, there's no one to blame but yourself, and that it's a hard thing to swallow. To be like, I could have saved this file, or I could have done everything I could to save this. Another practice that I used to get into, actually I still get into, is I will share a piece with a close friend. So I'll just send them like a document on WhatsApp, and be like, hey, what do you think of this? Half of it is because I really want their opinion. Like, artists are ego driven. But what's really saved me is when a file is missing. Um, Maybe it's saved to the wrong place, it's gone to the temporary files. I have a copy to go back to. So, like, getting into the practice of data backup. The other one is documentation, but that's like late career stuff. If you're late career and you're watching this, you're probably just my friend. So thanks for watching up until now. Go back to work, please. But for those of you that are early career, mid career, maybe looking for a little bit of advice, some guidance, um, yeah, keep watching, keep listening. You saw that the shadows changed there for a second. I didn't actually speak about the shadows in the forms as much. When doing the kind of illustration that I do, oh yeah, okay, here's a good example. Um, Sometimes you will just pick a blue, not a gray, a blue for a shadow, because a blue is cool and shadows are cool. When your light is warm, and vice versa. If you have a cool light, you have a warm shadow. Um, for anyone who doesn't know what that means, that color circle that you see in the bottom left corner, um, everything around the red and the orange and the top of the green, those are all warm colors. And then obviously at the opposite side is the cooler colors. It's your blues, it's your deeper purples, it's your turquoises. And with the way digital arts programs are set up, you can just change the layer mode to multiply, and reduce the opacity a little bit, and you can get some very nice shadows. Like this is a cheat that some people make fun of, but it's like the job is done at the end of the day. What you should be doing is learning color theory to be able to do these shadows without that tool. In the same way that painters add shadows, like moving from an orange, um, to a blood, to a maroon and around, and knowing how those reds interact. Um, but yeah, no, at least not for my process right now. I do that when I'm doing strict digital painting, but for this digital illustration, I was like, nah, I will cut quarters to get this done. Um, if the corner cutting gets you to the place it needs to be, then it's perfectly fine. As long as you're not stealing somebody else's work, there's a lot of room for um, virtual snakes and ladders for you to just climb very quickly. Um, there's a big debate around rotoscoping slash tracing. Um, so too with using reference. and photo bashing. But for the purposes of this is completely 100% my work. Aside from the fact that I'm doing a mascot that doesn't belong to me. All the actual line work and detail and the speckles and the dots, it's all completely me. Yeah. At around this stage, I get really frantic about saving. Um, because with the broader strokes, so like putting down the yellows and the blues for the fur and the clothes, those are easy. It's the having to dot again. And yes, there are brushes that do like snow and dust, and particles, but fine tuning them for each individual situation is sometimes more effort than it's worth. And I just like to dot across the page. More fine details. I wanted like a purplish light to hit this package, in a way that makes it feel foil, or at the very least, it feels like a different material than anything else on this page. And that's a difficult thing to do when you don't have a solid process. Um, there's a local artist that I've worked with that everything he does is on the same kind of material ideation, and that's a fancy way of saying all the metals he draws look the same as all the trees that he draws. That looks like the same as the plastic that he draws, the tiles and the stone. And I'm like, you need to apply different textures, treatments to different surfaces. And there's nothing I can do. Like sometimes somebody won't listen. Hopefully you do. So with this foil plastic, it has harder edges than his fur, and so making sure that the light catches it at these very sharp, um, angular inflections, is really important to capture that the foiliness of it. Um, but then also foil has a really nice reflective element, so I added these just a brighter red to have like shape, not just so much shape and form, but like foil is shiny and it's shiny in various ways, and I wanted to capture that as best as possible. Yeah. Mm. um Early career, I think this would have taken me maybe 3 4 hours to do. One, because I didn't know how to do the layers. Two, I didn't have a solid process. um but three is the shortcuts and the hotkeys. I'm not going to do the maths right now, but all the tools on the left, if it takes you 1 second to think of changing tools from a pen to a ruler to a color to a brush, going to click that new tool and then dragging your pen back to the same place you were at, that's that's literally like maybe 2 seconds, which doesn't feel like a lot, but those 2 seconds start to accumulate over a long period. And I did do the maths once, um, and I spent something like 1 month of that year just clicking in between tools. Like if I'm counting the entire process of a digital illustration, how long it takes me to change tools, how often I need to change tools, and then multiply those all together. It it went from, like seconds to minutes to days, and those days became weeks, and it's like I've literally spent a large chunk of my waking life just clicking between a brush, a pen, a magnifying glass. And so, in whatever program that you're in, learn the shortcuts. Whether you Google them or you hard remap them. For myself, Z is a magnifying glass because I remember to zoom. B is a brush because that's easy. Um, G um, is a paint bucket. I know that was misleading, but I think like earlier programs had gradients rather than paint buckets, or there was a paint bucket, but the gradient tool was always next to it, and so those two tools are usually friends with each other. So even if you look on the side, the paint bucket around the lower section of the screen is right above the gradient, and you can toggle between them. So if you press G once, it's the paint bucket, and if you press it again, it's the gradient tool. So learning things like that, learning tool clusters, learning your shortcuts, learning your hotkeys, it'll make things so much faster and efficient. So scaling back from 4 hours to 1 hour to do the exact same piece of work, um, it'll actually free you up to do more details because there is like a psychic fatigue, a mental fatigue to doing this. And so take care of your mental health. Make sure you stretch in between. Um, Avoid looking at screens for too long. Don't damage your eyes. Take like genuine days break away from your work. And yeah, as I wrap up this image, I really just wanted to say thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you got something out of it. And this this rendition of this character that I'm doing, it's exciting me, and I hope the right eyes see it. I'd love to do more character design work and bring a spark to local food brands or any brands really. Um, as I take a little bit of a break from Comic Cons and I focus a little bit more on building my portfolio and my work. Yeah. If you have any questions about anything that I do, you can reach out to me at any time. My socials are there. It's at Bill Masuku Art. Follow me on most things: Facebook, Instagram, formerly X. I'm also on Blue Sky now. I just don't have that logo handy. If you scan the QR code, it'll take you right to my Instagram account where I mostly am. And yeah. I'm open for work, but I'm also open to talk. I'm also open to teach, particularly when it comes to um, African digital art, African storytelling, and most things in Southern Africa. Yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. Click over here for my previous video, and click over here to find out what I was up to in the past. Yeah. Stay dope. Drop down a comment on if you have any questions about this piece in particular. If anything made you feel like he lost me completely, I'd love to hear it. Once again, don't forget to hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss anything from me and my socials. The likes do help in terms of the algorithm. It may help somebody else see the work if it becomes more popular, so someone might need it. Do the right thing, do the great thing, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.